Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be learning about the CSS box model, and we are going to be building these 6 little boxes and the outer box surrounding them. So we're going to be having the sassy box, the chatty box, party, litty, kitty, witty, all them 6 boxes. So stay tuned and enjoy as we go. So this is the HTML we'll be working with, and we have the body, we have the container div, and then we have 2 rows actually, and each row has 3 boxes. Going to the CSS, I've tried to make it as simple as possible so that we can build everything from scratch until we get to where we were at the end. Okay, so here we have the body, and I gave it a background color of, I don't know what this color is called, but I like it. So I decided to leave that as the background color. And that's because we are going to be talking about CSS Box Model. We're going to be talking about padding, margin, and content, and all that. So I wanted to give a background color so that we have a visual effect of what we are working with. Then the font family, of course, for the text. Then we have the container for the 6 boxes that we are working with, and we gave it a maximum width of 600 pixels because we don't want it to be wider than that. It can be smaller but not wider. Then we have the row. Each row has 3 boxes, remember. First of all, I wanted to point out that in CSS, or in HTML, by default, the body element has a margin, very tiny margin. So I'm just going to show us here. What I'll do is to inspect, and let's visualize some things from our browser. So just going to make this, I'm going to close the sidebar for VS Code, and I'm going to make this wider a bit. Yep. So I think this is fine. So here we have the HTML, and at the center we have the element styles. There's nothing here for now because we haven't gotten to the body of the HTML file. Then on the right we have things that shows us the margin, the border, and the padding of whatever we are working with. Oh, we have something here at the moment which just says a width of 860. This is the width of the viewport that we are working with. So if we pick the body, we'll see the CSS, the styles of the body, and then we'll see the color that we gave it, we'll see the font family. And I said that by default, CSS body has a margin. So, and the margin here is 8 pixels, as we can see. So it's 8 pixels all around the top, the right, the bottom, and the left hand side. So this is what the CSS box model actually looks like. This thing we have down here, it's what we have here. So the CSS box model consists of 4 items. It has, starting from the innermost item, it has the content of the element, and the element can be anything, body, div, list item, whatever. So it has the content of the element, then it has the padding around the element, and it has the border, and then it has the margin. So yeah, so the border, you can style the border and give it a color, you can give it a width, but for most websites you see that the margin and the padding are set to 0. This is automatically changing what is set by default. So you have a margin of 0 and a padding of 0. Now the next item is the container, which contains the 2 rows that contain 3 boxes each, and then we have a max width of 600 px. Okay, and what we want to do is to give it a border. Remember I said you can give the border a color and also a style. Now if we go back to the browser and we select our container, with the class container, we can see on the box model that the width is 600 px, which is what we want. The height is 37.0, and that's actually because of its content. If we add more items, the height will increase. Then the padding is 0 for now. The margin is also 0 for now. The border has a width of 5px, and if you see, just hovering over this number 5 shows that it says, just gonna wait for it to show up again. Come on. Okay, you're not showing up. Okay, let's take another one. So this is border left width. You can actually specify this individually. So you can specify the left width to be 10, the right width to be 2, the top width to be something else, the bottom width to be something else. That would still apply. But here, since we just specified only one width, it will apply to the 4 of them. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is to actually, for the container, we want to give it, we want to center it horizontally. So we just say margin and we'll say 0 and auto. So we have 0 for top and bottom, auto for left and right, which will centralize the element at the center of its parent. Now, coming back to the container finally having a width of 600 and something, if we go back to this place, let's select it again. By the way, the browser I'm using is Firefox developer version. Is it version or edition? Yeah, Firefox developer edition. So it's a very good tool for developers, especially if you're doing front-end development. There are some things that I'm showing here that we will not be able to access if we're using any other browser. So yeah, I think we can actually edit some of these things here, like this width of 600. We can make it 5 or 400, and you can see that the width has reduced. Unlike other browsers, we may not be able to do this on other browsers. Okay, so moving ahead, I'm just going to refresh this to reset what we had initially. By the way, I'm going to zoom in on my code editor. I don't know if you guys can see it clearly, but I think it's better now. Now going back to the browser, we have a width. I'm going to pick my element again. The container has a total width of 610, and that is because by default there's a way CSS works with HTML elements. What happens is that when you set a width on an element, the width is applied to the content, or let me use the word, the inner content of the element. Yes, so in this case, going back to, I'm just going to select, for the box model, I'm going to select the container, so we can have the container. So going back to the container, we can see that the content actually has a width of 600 pixels, which is what we want it to be. When we add the width of the content, 600 ps, and the width of the padding, in this case we have just 0, and the width of the margin, which is 5px on the left, 5px on the right, we'll have the total width of that element, which will sum up to 610. That is how CSS works by default. If we want the width of the element to be the total width, that's including everything, both the content, the padding, and border, then we have to change how the box is sized. In fact, to show us that the padding is part of the width of the box, I'm just going to come here and say a padding of, let's say, 10px. When we leave it at 10px, it's going to apply on all sides, top, bottom, left, and right. So coming back here to pick the container, we can now see that the width has increased to 630. So 600 content width, 10 on the left padding and the right padding, that is 620, 5 on the left border and on the right border, that is 630 px. The height has also increased to 67. If we do not want the total width of the container or the total width of the element to exceed the width that we specified, then we have to add a particular property called box sizing. So we're just going to come to the container and we'll say box sizing, and we're going to say border box. By default it is content box, which is what we had before. Now we're going to say border box. Coming back to the box model, we have a content width of 570, padding 10. The border width that we specify is going to remain the same. The padding we specify will remain the same, but the content width we adjust to accommodate the padding and the border so that everything sums up to 600 ps, which is our total width. Why do we bother about the total width being the summation of the padding and the border? That's because on a full website, on a complete website, you are going to be having a lot of elements trying to figure out how to place themselves, and if you do not specify something, some elements will flow into other elements, and that is not what you want. I'm just going to open the MDN website so you have a visual understanding of what I am saying. Now see the MDX website. It has this is box sizing. You can just Google that. So it says this particular example, so I'm going to show us the initial example. Now this first example says box sizing content box and then a width of 100%. Now if we go to the next one, we can see that the border has been added, border of 10px has been added, padding of 5px has been added. For this particular, this is the child component, which is this one, that's what is being styled. For the child component to maintain the same width of 100%, which is the width of the container, for it to maintain that width in a content box situation, there is going to be an overflow to accommodate the padding and the border of 10px that we have here. Okay, so yeah, the width is still 100% the width of the parent container. Let's say the parent container width is 100px or 200px. The child container width is still 200px, then plus 5px for the padding and 10px for the border, making it 100 and let's do the math. Padding left and right is 10px, border left and right is 20px, so that's 130px total width. Meanwhile, the next one that has a box sizing of border box, if we come down here, even though every other thing is the same, just because we made it border box, all the elements are all the properties of the element are collapsed to have a total width of 100%. I'm going to be taking off this box sizing property we just changed and leave it to be default so that we can still be able to see our weight, our padding and our border. And I'm going to select the container here on the browser. So we have our 600 with 10px padding and 5px border width. Now going back to the rows, we want to give some space around each row so that they don't just stay stuck to each other. So I'm just going to add this margin of 20px, so there will be a margin around each row. So we have that the row has a width of 560, and guess what, that width is coming from okay, going back to the container, we have a width of 600. Yeah, now inside the container here we see that the first row has a width of 560. My aim is not to bore you with mathematics, but just stay with me and you begin to understand some of these things. Now, what's the relationship between 600 width container and 560 width row? That's because we have a margin of 20px around each row. So let's forget about around and just stick to what is happening on the horizontal axis. So we have margin left of 20px, margin right of 20px for each row. So that margin is saying I want my row to be separated from the container with a space of 20 on the left, 20 on the right. And when you subtract 20, 20 and 20 from the original width of 600, you have a width of 560. So that is the width that each row inherits, even though the content of each row does not sum up to 120, because each row has 3 boxes and each box has a width of 120px. When you multiply that by 3, that is 360px. But then the whole row itself has a total width of 560, and that's why we still have some spaces at the end of the row. Now we go back to the row and then add the justify content space around. So far, let's see what's going on here on the browser. We still have the same thing for the box model of the row. So now that we've come to styling the row, I'm going to give the container a background color so that we can also have see the visual effects of the changes that we're making. So I'm just going to see background color, and I'm going to say C2 F2. It's a hashtag before it. Okay, now we have a beautiful color that looks like lilac, something like a light purple, and I like it. So this is getting close to what we had initially. What we want to do next is to add some space around the content of each box. Padding of, let's say, 20px, border of, say, 2px, so it looks smaller than what we had on the container. And we'll say border style of dash to make it different. So we see now that we have dashed borders around each boxes, and with a width of 2px. So now the box has a total width of 164. So I'm just going to take this back to solid so we have something like what we are trying to achieve. So the next thing we want to do is to add box shadow. So we'll come down here and say box shadow, solid box shadow, and there are two things that a box shadow has. It has the offset Y, it has the offset X, and then it has the color. So we'll give it offset X, means on the X axis, which is the horizontal axis, how far do you want to move the box, the shadow, because in real life that's how shadows are. There's a horizontal movement and then there's a vertical movement from the original item. Okay, so we're going to start with the X, and we'll say we want to give it 3px. The Y, we want to give it 4px. If you look closely, you will see that we have the black shadow just by the right hand side of each of the boxes. But what we're aiming for is a red shadow, so we're just going to add the color of red. But we're almost there. So the one more thing we can add is a blur effect on the shadow so that it looks more realistic. Shadows are not very clear, so let's make it realistic. So we're going to give it a blur radius of, let's say, 5px. Yeah, that's more like it. So now we have a blur radius of 5px. Let me know in the comment section if you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did. See you next time. Bye.